I mean, because each one of those sites has a stole strip that's 22 feet long, 2,200 feet long and 200 feet wide. Because I used to bring all of our airplanes in on. So
it's a unique feature of that. But then we go to Site 2. What do you know about Site 2? I'm sure.
Well, I mean, that's where Phil Moore, my dear friend that was the deputy combat crew commander when it blew. I mean, just an unfortunate situation. Can you imagine? It had the two water wells. You see, it provided water from an underground pipeline both to Site 1 and to Site 3. Can you imagine after that site blew up that the Air Force still had to go out there and keep that water treatment facility and the wells running because the other two sites needed the water?
The water treatment was above ground.
Yeah. And it's much identical to the same water treatment facility at Site 4.
I'll ask you this. Was it as violent as Damascus?
Well, no. And why? Well, number one is, when Site 1 blew up, the doors were not completely, or Site 2, the doors were not completely closed. I have never found a photograph, but in talking with Phil and numerous other people, when Site 2 did blow, being the doors weren't completely closed, because in essence, you have to understand how Site 2 blew up. The launch platform / elevator dropped the missile. And when that occurred, now granted, it wasn't very far,
but
it was a mob. Yeah, I had heard at one point it was like 3 feet. Damn. But the point being is, in how did that really occur? It was the automatic pop-off for the LOX tank on board the Atlas F. It's an automatic safety. When the pressure builds too much in the tank itself, as it's getting warmer, liquid oxygen expands and converts back to a gas. Well, obviously, the pressure is going to increase. Well, that pop-off valve opened up, and it spewed the liquid oxygen that had to be above 297. So maybe, let's say it was at 285, okay? It made contact with the steel cabling for the launch platform and created, I don't know what the technical term is, a fracturing, a cryo fracture. Something like that is super, super cold. Well, when the LOX hit that, it just, in essence, disintegrated, right? Well, it was under pressure. I was under load. Johnny had the missile. So when it fractures that, the platform drops. Well, when the platform dropped with the Atlas F on it, the bulkhead between the liquid oxygen and the RP-1, it just combined. And of course, you take LOX and you introduce it to a hydrocarbon, watch out, you're going to have horrific explosions. And so the doors were not completely closed, is my understanding. What occurred, it blew the doors all the way back. And I think with such a force, they disconnected from the hydraulic rams. Now, one of the maintenance shop guys at the MAMS building, Hangar 85 at Walker, when he had heard that Site 2 had blown up, he climbs on top of the MAMS building, okay, which was one of our old hangars during the war, okay? He climbs up on top of it, and he was telling me the story. He says, Gary, you could make out how high the smoke and even the flames. They say the flames coming out of Site 2 was nearly 7 stories tall.
Damn.
So that's a flame of greater than 70 feet. I mean, I'm just, wow. Okay. And it burned for a week. I mean, I don't know. It had to be absolutely something. And,
well, that valve, the separation that you're talking about that didn't separate whatever valve, that wasn't similar to a butterfly valve on Titan 2, was it?
No. Where they could dial in the code, and they could do things. No. This was just simply the bulkheads of the tanks inside the structure of the missile itself that held both the RP-1, which was just plainly distilled kerosene. You know, we called it rocket propellant 1, but, you know, again, it's just like Jet A. And then, of course, the other tank was the LOX tank on board the missiles. So when you had this occurring, I mean, but, you know, look, the Air Force investigators, it's just like at Site 1 that blew in June of 63. What they identified it with, it would have passed its propellant loading exercise, okay? It did not have a problem. So in essence, they took the missile up, they did a mock run-up of everything, adding the liquid oxygen to it, silo doors opening, launch platform, raising the missile to the surface to act as if the emergency war order came through from the president. Everything was to go. It was the taking it down, taking it back into its underground, you know, layer, so to speak. And as it was being lowered and the silo doors were closed and it's at its base, of course, they had to detank the liquid oxygen from the missile itself back into its storage, into the LOX tank, right? Well, it encountered I can't fathom even how big it was. They found the valve, and there was must have been a small enough piece of a hydrocarbon that it burnt through the side of the and then it started spewing more liquid oxygen outside into the surrounding area of what we call the missile enclosure area, the MEA. And once it got into more hydrocarbons, you had a catastrophic explosion. And this one was worse because the doors were closed. Okay. Just like if we looked at Damascus. Okay. Now, granted, I mean, I don't know how many in terms of gallons, because Titan 2 was hypergolic. Okay. I don't know the amount of each one of the chemicals, how many gallons there were. But I can tell you that sliding door was greater than 700 ton.
Hell yeah.
I mean, some of them fluctuated just a little. I've heard everything from 700 to 740. Okay. Well, you know, I mean, it blew that thing off. In fact, blew the warhead 600 or 700 feet, you know, with the RV, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, that's conventional.
And you know what was really interesting? That the core guy that did the bulk of the work at the accident, he was given the re-entry vehicle, and by God, it wound up on eBay. Can you imagine? Oh, wow.
Well, that's not. It's not.
What a great piece to own, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
Had it not been, our safeguards held. I mean, it was a true testament to how we put it together. Okay. I mean, it wasn't like our training accidents. When we lost the 4, you know, Atlas F sites to propellant loading exercising problems, I mean, there was a dummy warhead. The true warhead was taken off. Okay. And that wasn't the case with Damascus. So, I mean, I go back to it. I said, you know, those safeguards for all those years, I mean, you know, again, because what was it? I mean, in the last 10 or 15 years, you remember when all of a sudden some missile, and it wasn't a Minuteman. I don't remember if it was air launch or something. It was coming back from one of the northern bases to 2nd Air Force, which at the time it was 2nd Air Force, and that's Barksdale Air Force Base in Bossier City, Shreveport, Louisiana. Okay. And it had come to find out when the launch crew got it on the ground in Barksdale, they noticed that it had a rocket on it.
Nice.
I mean, and of course, you just don't do that. I mean, somebody major dropped the ball. I mean, I can't fathom it. It's just like you might as well try your career over. Of course, I forget how many of them, even the commanding officers were all relieved because, you can't have that. That is, to me, was just such an unmistakable, stupid mistake. I mean, somebody was not following the tech orders. And if anything, I have been taught from the old timers, you follow those tech orders. I mean, you want to talk about a really interesting point is that Phil Moore, as a first lieutenant and a deputy combat group commander at Site 2 when it blew. Now, they had the standboard team there, which was the best, the ones that are given the check ride to all of the other guys. So here, they're there, and they're going through things. And the commander for the standboard unit is in essence doing things that is not according to the checklist. And Phil Moore tells me, he goes, Gary, the commander, his name was Jim Bloodhart, I think was his name, Youngblood or Bloodhart. Anyway, he immediately gets on the recorded microphone that's in front of the console, and he spurts out that is not in the technical order, and we are going on record, this crew, that this is not correct. And I'm sure the reason he did that was because you didn't want to see if something's going to go wrong here and you didn't follow your checklist, they didn't want to get their tail in the ringer.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going on record that wasn't followed. And so you see that a lot. And I mean, I can't fathom how heavy duty that had to be. Especially like for the accident. So, I mean, I really can't answer your overall question. I mean, I know it's been a long time going all the way back, but I mean, I'm not too sure. I mean, then we get into a force. How much was the force inside of the Titan II silo? I mean, obviously it had to be much bigger than the Atlas F's. Because, of course, the only one that we know of the accident was at Site 1 because its doors were truly closed. Okay. Site 5 accident occurred when it's up and locked, up at the top.
Right.
It passed its propellant loading exercise. The inspector general that was giving the ORI, the operational readiness inspection, was present in the lower level of the launch control center.
Damn.
It had passed. We got to go. He's gone. Missiles up and out of here. Okay. That general leaves. He goes upstairs, gets in his car, and his driver is driving him down the access road to go back to Walker.
What the hell was it? What the hell was he looking at? If he thought it left.
Well, I mean, that was one of the questions I had, Bryce. I always thought that was really kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know if the general didn't want to be there when it blew up, because it seems like, that's one that cost Chalifo, our second squadron commander's job. I mean, first time the Air Force Review Board said the squadron commander didn't help enough when the second site blew. He kept quiet. He spoke too much when he's on the last one at Site 5. When it blows, the Air Force condemned him for not saying enough. And the joke was, well, what do you want me to do? The first time you criticized me for saying too much, and the second time you criticized me for not saying enough.
That's right.
And I really see the point of it.
It's bullshit.
I don't know. But what is really interesting with Site 5 is that they got it up and locked, right? And in essence, they're trying to bring it down. And they can't get it to come down. They can't get it down. So, I mean, there goes the general. So they're having a real tough time. And, I mean, who's really interesting in all of this? And I don't know if he's alive. Bill Moore is, of course, I believe is still alive. But his good friend at the time, because they were all very close as junior officers, and that was Gene Lamb. And Gene, that was his site. And so he was one time at one of the reunions, we're sitting in one of the hotels they're all staying in. We're sitting at the bar drinking. And, of course, Gene, I don't know how we got on it. I'm perhaps asking the question about, Site 5. And he was explaining to me that was his primary alert duty site, even though he was not on duty the day it blew. And, he said, everybody was proud because they had worked so hard of getting it to, hopefully pass its operational readiness inspection. Okay. And so he was out there, even though he may not have been in the control center, things like that. The way he told me is that he was up on the surface and they're having this problem, and they make the comment to personnel to go out to Highway 380, because keep in mind, Site 5 is only 8.5 miles further east than where I am right now. Okay. So they asked Gene, go out there and block the highway. And there's a small hill that the cars come off of. And Gene is blocking traffic. And he makes the comment to me. He says, Gary, it was the prettiest sight in the world. My God, the Atlas F up. I mean, God, it just looked beautiful. And he says, as I'm standing there blocking traffic, I'm looking at it, and it literally looks like it expands. So I tend to believe it's like the off-gassing of the locks. And everything expands to the point when it blew up. And then, of course, it was a spectacular explosion. He said it hit his chest with enough force to knock him down. Okay? And that, of course, was a good distance away. And I often laughed. A funny one, and I still have pieces of it, was when Site 2 blew up. Phil Moore, the Deputy Combat Crew Commander, made the comment to me. He said for years he used to go out there and walk around away from the site and pick up original pieces of the Atlas F skin.
That's awesome.
Okay. And sure enough, God, once Phil told me that, I mean, I'm all in, I'm all fours, I'm out there. And by God, I got some great pieces. We're doing the testing with the Corps, retesting, I should say. And this is like, 2006, 8. Yeah. And I'm out there with one of the guys from the environmental company assigned to the Corps of Engineers. And Dale Flores and I are walking around, and I'm like kidding Dale. I said, come on, Dale, let's go find pieces of the old missile. And sure enough, you could kick it over the blow dust, and you could sometimes move things with your feet. And all of a sudden, here'd be a piece of the stainless steel, which, of course, keep in mind, the skin of the Atlas F was less than the thickness of a dime. So it was always fun to go find pieces like that.